Greetings, ladies and metal-gents, and welcome to this narration of the web series The Lost Terran. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 26. Rix assembled the message to a singular screen. Terran text message. He is not the last one. 045G001042D. System Terran message. Seeking that which is lost. Coordinates 5871R-284-876X. System Terran message. Do not attempt to return to origin. Coordinates 0101A777003M. Additional coordinates to follow. Error. System Terran message begins. Depart, flee, run! Further messages to follow. Error. Strangely enough, he did recognize them as jump space coordinate system, but there was a message here too. He hadn't brought it up with Munter or Blind, not that he could do more than basic communications with Blind without Munter's help. It was an old TSC code in any case. Just the presence of it made him suspicious. The only beings that knew that he was from the TCS were the Tassets and himself. Munter had indicated that they hadn't said anything about the TSC, but if the Tassets were as interconnected as all that, it didn't take a genius to look up their search history. And this was the part that made Rix more nervous. Someone was monitoring the Tassets network and had managed to pick out that he was a Terran, was from the TSC, and had access to a jump drive. It wasn't an impossible feat. In his own time, and some 900 years ago, they had pseudo-AIs which were capable of such network monitoring. That said, they'd have to be crazy complex to be able to manage to connect all of these dots, particularly in sending an encoded message with jump space coordinates. But then, with artificials like Munter flying around, the stars all by themselves, it would be almost surprising if there weren't full-bore artificial dedicated to such a purpose as network monitoring. Maybe that's what a tacit matrix is. Munter hadn't been able to provide any particular clarifying information on the matrix. The way Munter described it, the matrix was more of a kind of master formulator of tacits and coordinating the actions of various tacits relative to organics. Such a tasking wasn't unusual, but even Munter seemed confused as to why a matrix would have deliberate tasking specifically associated with Terrans, when equivalent tasking could be included by default into formulations. Rix had no answers for Munter, not yet. He brought up an old application on his scroll and started working to try and decodering his way into a message. Without knowing the key phrase, he wasn't able to easily guess. So he tried for the old trick of rearranging the words from between the messages. He looked at the most recent message. He is not the last. Munter had been shocked to read it, and Blind had been surprised that Rix hadn't been overwhelmed with joy at not being alone. Rix wasn't certain if that was the actual message, but it was at least a small comfort to believe for a moment that he was, in fact, not the last Terran in existence. Blind had been taking some time to preen, her feathers having apparently gotten quite tangled from being in the void suit for so long. Munter had wanted to immediately begin charging the jump space drive and go to the coordinates, but Rix had insisted that Munter use the walking frame to scan through the remainder of the station with the Terran-grade sensors to see what could be salvaged and what could be learned about the station's history. Munter had insisted that this did not require his full attention and wanted to talk with the Terran, but Rix had waved that off and sat in the command deck with his scroll, locking off the scroll communications. He is seeking lost origin. Depart was one message. Run to origin. Lost is lost was another. Lost origin. Seeking he. Run was the final variant. Of those messages, Rix preferred the first and the third, but wondered about the second. He wasn't certain as to the origin coordinates for the TSC, and he certainly didn't know what it was for Old Terra. If those coordinates had been more widely known, even within the TSC, someone might have been tempted to use the jump drive as a kind of kinetic weapon. Having seen the records on what happened to the colony system, Rix had a pretty good idea of what had happened on that count. While his own situation was different. To manage to have the majority of the colony fleet emerge from jump space or in a sufficiently near planets or planetoids as to effectively detonate them, it would have required either a major mass calculation or sabotage. As much as Rix wanted to believe in incompetence having played a more significant role, he'd seen the probes be fired off to map the system and return. There was no way that the Colonial Administrator's navigation group would have missed entire planets and planetoids as part of their scan. Unless it was sabotage, or, and this was sadly always a possibility, the probes had gone to the wrong system, and some factor between the jump drive and the vessel size had sent them enough off course that between the probes and the colony vessel there was enough difference for the jump drive to matter. Some calculations rounded off at the wrong place, perhaps. It wouldn't have explained why they hadn't caught the differential, stars still being adequately different, such that it shouldn't have been possible to mix up whatever the other system was, which brought Rix back to sabotage. He still didn't like the theory. A colony wasn't a threat to anyone, really, especially with as far out as they were headed. Even the TSC was only likely to care about colonies in their own region, let alone one that was so far out as to require being almost entirely self-sufficient from day zero. Incompetence again reared its head. It wasn't impossible, either, that whomever had needed to certify the systems as good for the colony had merely glanced at the probe reports and the planned travel and simply stamped it as approved. Given the distance involved and the associated time and jump, it was possible that they had simply forgotten to account for the shift in the system planet's positions in the almost 100 weeks that they would be in flight, and not the 10 that everyone on board the vessel was to experience. That at least would make sense for an oversight, especially with the jump drive being so new and secretive to the TSC. And in a way, incompetence is a kind of sabotage, just not the deliberate malicious kind. After all, how many times had his own official documentation been screwed up by various officials over the years? Rix decided that he liked the first one and used that pattern to decode the associated coordinate system. 0451G001, 5871R, 876X, 003M, 001, 777, 284. Taking this, he pushed the coordinates into the navigator tool, and the colony leader had insisted they all install. For once, Rix was happy to have done so, even if the stellar cartography associated with it took up a very substantial chunk of the memory of the scroll. It took a few minutes, the navigator tool conducting several checks against approximated locations before presenting it to Rix. According to Rix's stellar cartographic records, it was a white dwarf system that was almost certainly dead in Rix's time. But no probes had ever gone there, so only some records were made. It was only a 5-day jump from here, though. Not a long trip, but long enough that Rix knew that he'd want to have Munto check the destination against their internal stellar cartography. "Hey, got a minute?" he asked the air, knowing Munto was almost certainly listening and waiting.
"I am available. What assistance do you require?"
Munto's mechanical voice rumbled through the command deck speaker. "I need to check the coordinates of our destination, and any information that you have on that system. Keep us offline for now, though," Rix said, as he tapped the coordinate pattern into the screen that Munto could see and control. Munto took the numbers, noted that they were in a different pattern than initially presented, and paused.
"Why did you change the numbers?"
he asked. "Someone sent me a message. If I'm right, those coordinates should work," Rix said, sitting back and swinging back and forth a bit.
"Did you attempt to check the coordinates as delivered?"
Munto asked. "No, but I can do that now. Please go ahead and run the system I provided against your internal data. While I do that, though..." Rix grabbed a scroll and pulled it towards himself. Rix tapped away at the scroll in silence of the ship. It was quiet in that way that only a ship can be. Not quiet in terms of the actually being quiet or silent, but being quiet in the kind of normal mechanical hum that most ships had, which became a kind of constant in the background that nobody really noticed until it wasn't there. Not that the ship was normally loud, but there was a kind of special quiet that came from being in the void compared to being connected to a docking port or planet side. The vibration seemed to bleed away into the void at times, making it even quieter. Rix had guessed about where the coordinates in a normal format went, and it turned out to be close to right. The navigator tool threw up multiple "Are you sure you want to go there?" errors and pointed at the region of the void 38 weeks away from their current location. Rix hadn't guessed it going that far, but given the enhanced coordinate system of the jump drive, he wasn't surprised. It was a smart move by whomever or whatever it was that had sent him the coordinates. For any being who didn't know the old TSC codes as well as the right one, they would think that the Terran was running for a spot so far from the galactic community, if you could even call it that, so as to require a massive effort just to try and follow. If Munto's tacit friends were restricted to more standard FTL systems. It had taken several minutes, but he was ready when Munto was. At the same time, Monte started looking at the coordinates and dug into the local database of stellar cartography. The system was shown as a blue giant in the records with advice to avoid if possible. In fact, the whole region of space around it, almost every direction out to 15 light years, was marked for tacits to avoid. The system in that region of space were unremarkable and marked as fully surveyed and uninhabited, so it made sense that no tacit would go to that region at all. Monte turned to one of the sensor suites and looked into the correct direction to see if they could pinpoint the star. It was difficult, the background of the other stars making it a challenge even for a tacit, but Monte could see it. It didn't look blue, but it was possible that the sensor was degraded. Monte rechecked the entry for the system. The reason was given for avoiding it, simply a warning advising avoidance. Monte returned their attention to Rex.
I have located the system. It appears to be listed as a blue giant with notes for tacits to avoid. The entire region appears to be cordoned off out to 15 light years, with this at its center,
Monte said. Sounds like my guess was right then, although I'm surprised, because my record showed being a white dwarf, Rex noted. Monte checked the sensors again. That would be more closely aligned with what they could sense, but it would be exceptionally odd that the Terran's database would be more up-to-date than Monte's.
That appears to match the sensor readings that I can make from here, but I am confused as to how your database is more accurate than my own,
Monte said flatly. I'm no astronomer, but I know some people spent their whole lives looking into the sky. Maybe they just happened to look hard and long at that general direction. Some of the most major projects of old Terra pre-FTL days involved long-distance astronomy, Rick shrugged. Monte wasn't terribly happy with his answer, but kept it quiet. The strange process in the back of their head appeared to grumble as well. I checked the location as delivered. The coordinates call for a 38-week jump to get there if they're accurate and not encoded, Rick said, and tapped the cartographic coordinates for Monte.
38 weeks, as in 38 weeks within jump space and 380 weeks in standard.
Monte was surprised and was already feeding the coordinates as Rick tapped the cartographic database. That's right. We wouldn't be able to make it without starving or running our fusion system dry. Max duration for the Esperanto is 22 weeks without refueling, and there's no master pool on board in jump space. At least, not that I've ever been told. Rick gestured vaguely at the digital gauges. Monte wasn't about to doubt the Terran now. Man could only stare at the cartographic records, so far outside the local map region as to be little more than a "Here There Be Dragons" annotation on the old Terran hand-drawn map. It seemed almost ridiculous, but appeared the Terran was right.
How do you propose we proceed?
Monte asked. Let's finish our salvage. Anything that we can get and make the next few days easier on us all. Speaking of which, how's Bryan holding up? Rex nodded.
She appears to be still processing her departure from her work, or her duty as commonly described by the Quinn, Monte said. I believe she is taking it better than most Quinn would, as she is houseless, and therefore something of an outcast, even in Quinn society.
I don't entirely understand that. I know we talked about it, and it even showed up in old Terra cultures, but it just seems strange to me. Rick shifted a bit in his seat.
Did none of the Terran cultures in your time maintain a habit of shunning? If I am translating the word correctly, Monte asked.
Oh, definitely, but that was usually more of an issue for people jumping star nations, not picking one job or another. Still happened, but that was more of a family business kind of experience instead of being flat out getting disowned for becoming a doctor instead of being a farmer, Rix explained.
Different cultures maintain different values and different connections,
Monte said simply. I guess. Still seems weird to me, but I guess it should. It's a whole different culture for a whole different species, Rick shrugged again. So why did she stay if she's such an outcast?
The majority of the species keep to themselves as far as the galactic community is concerned. There are actually very few species who interact on any more than just business basis. And even those few xenophiles who do travel often experience significant hardships, making it that much less desirable for any species representative not conducting official business.
Monte spelled out, going for so long that Rix was surprised the artificial didn't stop for breath, even if it wasn't needed. I know I always dreamed of meeting Xenos and seeing the state of galactic society and stations with hundreds of species all coexisting. Rix mused. His eyes glazed slightly.
To the best of my awareness, that is either not possible or has not been attempted on a scale to what you are describing.
Monte checked their records and found some that to match that statement. I'll say it again. This isn't the future that I figured it might be. So far, the most advanced things are you. the fabricators, and your galactic internet. Rick stood almost abruptly.
I'm afraid I cannot comment, given my limited understanding of what you perhaps expected relative to the current state of galactic society and technology.
Well, I'm gonna go find Blind. Let her know that we need to figure out whatever is left that we can take from the station before we cut it loose. Rick stretched. Definitely would love to crank up the gravity, but I know she probably can't take it. At least, not for as long as I'd want it turned up.
If we can take it a bit of time, I might be able to work out some variable controls for specific rooms, Munter suggested.
Well, we can certainly try, but ultimately, it will still come down to how much we can salvage and what our food stores look like. In fact, food should probably be our first challenge. If we can't stay fed over the next 5 days in jump space, it won't matter what's on the other end. Whether it's a blue giant, or a white dwarf, or a black hole, Rick said. Munter was already eyeing the Esperanto, trying to figure out just where to try and put the extra equipment in the already cramped interior. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Casper Arnholtz, Maxwell, Lord Azrekahl, Dragzoon W.R.E, Holly's sister, AmbroseKTal, and Quantem Wensday. Thank you very much.